is a cortical there. For an céad míle fáilte ar fád ag an Ard Fheis. I am honoured to welcome you all to the 106th Ard Fheis of Sinn Féin. The past year has been an eventful one since last we met in National Conference. It began with agreement being reached in the 6 counties on the devolution of limited powers of British policing to the Stormont regime. This marked one of the final steps in the restructuring of British rule in Ireland. However, the nature and reality of British occupation on the ground has not changed. Last month, it is reported, British soldiers participated in house raids in Derry. But we are also glad to note that the attitude of Irish Republicans to it has not changed either, as evidenced by the increased level of acts of resistance. Within the gallery, the POWs engaged in a heroic campaign of resistance to the attempts of the Stormont regime to criminalise them. Meanwhile, a war is being waged on the working people throughout Ireland and the world in order to prop up the failed and discredited economics which has caused the present collapse. For Sinn Féin, the past year marked a period of transition. Our now patron, Rory O'Reilly, stepped down last year as our president, a position he held with distinction and honour from 1970, with only a break of 3 years from 1983 to 1986. However, Rory, we are delighted to report, did not retire, but continued to make his valued contribution to our national leadership and our movement, to which he has devoted almost 61 years of his life. Over the course of the year, our movement withstood attack from a small minority of erstwhile comrades. The refusal of our members to be distracted from the primary goals and principles of our movement is something of which you all should be proud. On February 4th, it was announced that a Hillsborough Agreement Mark II had been reached between the DUP and the Provisionals for the devolution of limited powers of British policing to the Stormont Executive. This came following a protracted carnival of reaction at Hillsborough Castle. Even media commentators pointed to the inherent fault lines which exist in the 6-county statement. Stephen Collins, in the Irish Times of January 30th last, observed, I quote, "The Belfast Agreement enshrined the dysfunctional society's sectarian divisions into governmental institutions," unquote. While on January 31st, Tom McGurk, writing in his column in the Sunday Business Post, said, and again I quote, "Stormont may have new seating and the latest technology, but underneath it all, the DUP still stands for what it has always stood for: political supremacy over the nationalist community," unquote. All of this, of course, is no more than the Republican Sinn Féin pointed out 12 years ago. In a statement from the following day on Tuachtaráin Sinn Féin Public, Des Dalton pointed out, I quote, "As they don the uniforms and carry the weapons of their one-time enemy, it can be truly said that the poachers have become gamekeepers. When the new Bray Harriers take to the streets under Provo leadership and direction, history can be accurately said to be repeating itself. As British rule reaches into the grassroots in the 6 counties, British imperialism, in its updated mode, seeks to make itself more acceptable. However, history teaches us that it will once more be resisted," unquote. On February 6th, our Vice President Geraldine Taylor said that, and I quote, "The agreement at Hillsborough is just a further indication of the depths that unionised provisionals will go to uphold British rule in our country. They have now added the administration of British policing and justice to their already full portfolio in administering British rule on Irish people in the occupied 6 counties, quote. And she went on, she described it as, and I quote, the same old British boot with a willing provo foot, unquote. During protracted negotiations, it was revealed that the 3 sections of unionism were engaged in discussions with the British Conservative Party about an electoral pact, which came as no surprise. The scaly hand of the Orange Order had of course emerged in all of this. The historical forces of unionism and British imperialism remain at work, and the return to some form of majority rule cannot be far around the corner, as both the DUP and the British Tories have signalled. Reaching for the orange card has long been an option of first resort for the British Tories in their quest for political power at Westminster. In his maiden speech to the British House of Lords in the week following the signing of the Treaty of Surrender in 1921, the leader of unionism, Edward Carson, lamented his role in the Tory machinations. And I quote from Carson's, "What a fool I was. I was only a puppet, and so was Ulster, and so was Ireland, in the political game that was to get the Conservative Party into power," unquote. The more things change, the more they say the same. Broken into 5 sections, the document agreed at Hillsborough also contains a range of measures. Key points include, while the 6 county Justice Minister would have the same status as all other ministers in the power-sharing cabinet, he would have the power to make certain decisions without conferring with the executive, while issues of so-called British national security remain the prerogative of the British government and its intelligence agency MI5. A 6-member working group was to be appointed by the Stormont First Minister and Deputy First Minister, with the task of formulating a framework for new Orange Parade management procedures. Its work would place emphasis on local agreements, and it is this aspect which caused most fear for many nationalist communities, and how the rights of local residents and the Orange Order can be squared. Significantly, there was no commitment to an Irish language bill promised with the St Andrews Agreement in 2006, or education reform, or the much promised Bill of Rights. This devolution of British policing and justice powers changes nothing. The Stormont Executive will administer the limited devolved responsibilities for British policing and justice as a proxy for the British government. Political policing continues to be directed as before from London, under the St Andrews Agreement, amended by the Hillsborough Agreement. So-called security intelligence in the 6 occupied counties remains the responsibility of the MI5 Security Service, with the RUC/PSNI in a support role. This is not the devolution of policing and justice powers with London remaining in control. With an increased budget and a new HQ in Palace Barracks in Hollywood, County Down, MI5 will lead the British war machine in Ireland. MI5 is not accountable to the Stormont Policing Board for security-related matters, but it will be available to brief the board on what it considers to be appropriate. For their part, the Republican youth gave the RUC/PSNI their response on the streets of many towns throughout the occupied area. At a press conference held in Republican Sinn Féin's Ulster office on the Falls Road in Belfast on March 4th, it was revealed that at least 3 battle rounds, or plastic bullets, were fired by British ground forces in the Drumbeig area of Craigavon in County Armagh on February 27th. The RUC entered the area at around 10 p.m. They claimed this was in connection with the discovery of a suspicious object. However, this was simply a gas cylinder which had been discovered some 500 yards away at 12 noon. The British incursion into the area was resisted by nationalist youths and 3 battle rounds were fired. 2 of these rounds were fired at the ground, whilst the RUC fired a 3rd at a Republican, causing him serious injuries to his chest. Republican Sinn Féin organised a press conference at his Ulster office on the Falls Road in Belfast on February 19th, which was attended by the President as well as 2 Vice Presidents, Geraldine Taylor and Fergal Moore. The assembled journalists from the Irish News, the London Times, the Guardian, as well as the Press Association, were told of communities such as Lurgan were under siege from the forces of the British Crown. The past year has seen an increase in the number of acts of resistance directed against continued British rule in Ireland. In February alone, incidents across the 6 counties pointed to a level of intensity which the 26th County Justice Minister, Dermot Ahern, speaking on RT Radio 1's programme this week on February 28, acknowledged was as high as anything over the past 40 years. The head of MI5, Jonathan Evans, in a speech on September 17th, acknowledged this, and I quote, "Perhaps we were giving insufficient weight to the pattern of history over the past 100 years, which shows that whenever the main body of Irish republicanism has reached a political accommodation and rejoined constitutional politics, a hardliner rejectionist group would fragment off and continue with the so-called armed struggle," unquote. Like the French Bourbon kings, the English, it seems, have forgotten nothing, but they have learned nothing after 800 years of occupation. A new generation of people who continue to resist British rule on the ground have been dismissed as, and I quote, "disaffected youth without either aspiration or hope," unquote, by one commentator. It is nothing new to dismiss young Republicans in such terms. Over the decades, the idealism and belief of each new risen generation has been dismissed in similar terms as a means of denying the legitimacy of the Irish Republican demand for a free Ireland. Such denial is a disservice to the idealism and hope of young Irish people for a new Ireland. We salute this new risen generation. A survey carried out by Jonathan Hong, Professor of Politics Studies and Head of the Department of Politics Studies at the University of Liverpool, confirms the fact that there is still a significant section of the Irish people who oppose British rule in Ireland. Researchers spoke to 1,002 people across the 6 counties from a range of backgrounds. The face-to-face interviews were carried out in the 3 weeks after the British general election in May. It was part of a wider study, but included questions about attitudes to Republicans. Respondents were asked whether they had sympathy for the reasons why Republican groups such as the Continuity IRA continue the armed struggle. 8.2%, or 14% of those identifying themselves as nationalists, said yes. Some 12.9% of nationalists, or 7.8% of the overall survey, claimed to strongly like or like Republican Sinn Féin, while 7.5% of nationalists, or 4% of the overall survey, strongly liked or liked the 13 County Sovereignty Movement. 18% of nationalists, or 11% of the overall survey of the respondents, believed that the RUC PSNI to be very similar to what was described as the old RUC. And among those who designated themselves as nationalists, as I said, this was 18%. Professor Tong writes, they quote, "One of the mantras of the peace process is that dissident Republicans have no support. To suggest otherwise risks talking up a disparate, seemingly desperate band of diehards. It also disturbs the orthodoxy found on my side of the Irish Sea that Northern Ireland lies securely in the box marked solved. Yet, the assumption that dissidents have no support has been precisely that, an assumption, untroubled by actual evidence either way, until now that is," unquote. Not surprisingly, the findings were either largely ignored by the bulk of the media or dismissed by the storming political establishment. Speaking at the launch of Dr. Martin Frampton's Legion of the Rear Guard, Dissident Irish Republicanism, in London on November 2nd, the former General Officer Commanding of the British Army in the 6 counties between 1990 and 1993, General Sir John Winsley, said that he shared the same conclusion as the author about the situation within the 6 counties, and I quote, "which is that Irish republicanism has not yet been satisfied," unquote. He went on to say that while most people in what he calls Great Britain feel, and I quote him again, that Ireland is at peace and that it is over, those of us who are in touch with what goes on across the water know very well that this is not so, unquote. He then posed a number of rhetorical questions. And again I quote him, If I had been in the IRA, I would be saying, did we achieve our goal? Did we unite Ireland? Are we